everybody, it's Barbie Jane, and I want to say thank you so much for watching this video where we are talking about mastering effective communication skills. So communication is more than just talking. It's more than just blabbing around. But strong communication is actually the foundation of successful relationships. It's a tool and a skill that we can actually use on both the personal side and a professional side because we often communicate every single day, whether we're using our mouths, our hands, our gestures. Communication is all around us. At the end of this video, I hope that you're able to walk away with practical tools and strategies that will make you a better communicator. Okay, now let's dive into why communication matters and what is communication, right? But communication is not just about talking and blabbing away. I know, I could talk all day, but we're going to make sure that we get into the importance of it. Because the true importance of communication skills is making sure that we are being understood as the person that's speaking, and more importantly, the people who are listening to us actually understand us. That way, we're always on the same page when we are in conversation. Now, let's talk about bad conversations or bad communication versus good communication. In bad communication, we often deal with misunderstandings, conflicts that are so hard to resolve, and because of that, we end up having weak relationships with other people. But on the other hand, if we have good communication with other people, we actually start to build trust with one another. We're able to resolve conflicts quicker, and because of that, we have more meaningful and better connections with the people around us. Now, let's get into the how, better yet, the how of communication. The how of communication is through one thing, the power of active listening. Well, there's a lot of ways to have good communication, but we're going to dive into number one, the power of active listening. With the power of active listening, this means that you are fully present in the conversation. Your mind is not elsewhere. You're listening to the person that you're speaking to, and you're not just waiting for your turn, but you're actively involved in this conversation. And when you're actively involved, you know and you understand when your cues are to be able to respond, to react, and everything of that like. Now, how do you actively listen? A couple of things. Number one, you maintain eye contact. You make sure that the person that you're speaking to, you understand that you're in communication. You're looking at each other, right? Number two, nod occasionally. And maybe it's not nodding just as a yes, but like also a no, right? Or maybe your facial reactions is responding to it. Now, this is such an important thing because it lets the person that you're speaking to know that you are actively involved, you are reacting to what they're saying, and that you're responding, right? Because our reactions without having to say words out of our mouth is a form of response as well. And number three, you're going to avoid interrupting. Well, one of the things I hate, and I'm sure many people feel the same way, is when you're in the middle of speaking and someone just stops you in the middle of your track. It's so distracting, a lot annoying, and oftentimes it makes you feel like they don't care, right? And so if you are communicating with someone and you want to ensure that they know also that you are engaged and involved in the conversation, you do not interrupt. The last thing, better yet, that I want to talk about with active listening is that if there are things that you're not quite sure of or you need clarifications on, ask, right? Or summarize or even paraphrase the parts of that conversation to understand that, to make sure, better yet, that you're understanding what they are saying. Now let's talk about clear and concise speaking. So when you do this, I know it's quite tough, but we have to consciously think and be able to remove all the filler words that we normally have in our sentences. These filler words include the words like and and a lot of times we add them in because we're thinking, but more importantly, we're also adding in things that would be in a sentence, better yet, when we really don't have to. Now, if you wonder, how do I even remove that from my sentences when I get stuck? Here are a couple of tips. But better yet, a best tip. Just pause. Now, pausing helps us with a couple of things. First off, it helps us with making sure that our brain is catching up with our mouth when we speak. And what's great about it is it actually helps our listener be able to do the same thing too. When we start to remove those filler words, we start to keep our sentences clearer. We're making it concise and clear for the audience to hear. Another good thing about that is that it helps us be able to pace ourselves when we speak. Now, pacing ourselves is such an important thing because when we get nervous and we get excited and enthusiastic about what we say, we start to speak faster and start being quick with what we're saying, and a lot of times people are not able to understand. And so it's important for us to take a step back and be able to just pace ourselves. Now let's get into another topic. This is the nonverbal communication skills. So I mentioned to you earlier that communication, oftentimes we think it's just talking out of our mouth and saying all these different words. But nonverbal skills is also such a big thing. Notice how my hands are kind of always moving around, keeping the conversation interactive. You notice my face being able to adjust and reacting to moments. These are all important pieces of communication, because communication is not just the verbal, but also the nonverbal pieces. Did you know that 55% of communication is actually body language? 38% of that is our tone. Tonality is another piece. And then 7% of how we communicate is our words. One more time. Did you know that 55% of our communication comes through body language, 38% comes from our tonality, and only 7% is from our words? It's amazing, and just knowing those numbers actually remind us that communication involves so many other things aside from what we say. A couple of things I want you to keep note of when you communicate in that nonverbal language is, number one, if you are open and wanting to be engaged in a conversation, make sure you are aware of your posture. If you are open to a conversation, oftentimes your posture would show that you're open, you're standing up, you're facing towards someone. However, if you are not open to a conversation, normally our bodies cave in, we close out, we have our arms shut in a cross, or we're absolutely not even looking in that way. So you got to be mindful of your posture when you're speaking to someone. Also, be mindful of the gestures that you're showing. Right? I always have this joke where whenever you're talking to someone, right, and you're agreeing with them, but then your head is saying no, there's a disconnect in that sense. So you want to make sure that if you're trying to build trust, especially, and speak to someone, you want to make sure that your gestures and your reactions also match the words that you're saying. Now, the last thing is your facial expressions. Notice whenever you're engaged and you're smiling, you're leaning forward, you're wanting to be in that conversation, versus in times when you don't want to be in a conversation, your face is pretty stern, you're kind of angry, or you're not engaged, you're looking away. Make sure that you're consciously thinking of those different reactions and facial expressions, your postures and your gestures, because they all play a big role when you communicate with someone. A couple of things when you're talking to someone. You want to also be able to not just do the expressions and the gestures for yourselves, but also understand who you're speaking to and the posture and gestures that they also hold. That way you know if they are truly engaged or if you should just get away from that conversation because they may not want to talk to you. But be mindful, and that's what the most important thing is. Now, as we come to a close with this video, I do want to give you some actionable takeaways and a final tip. Whenever you're communicating with someone, I want you to implement the listen, think, and respond tip. Rule, better yet. So listen, think, and respond rule. I'm getting better at doing that, by the way, right? But the reason why I want you to be consciously thinking about this rule is because it gives us a moment to pause whenever we're speaking to someone. Whenever someone asks us a question, oftentimes we're so quick to respond just because we want to respond. We should now start to think that when we respond to someone, before we do so, we always want to understand what they're asking us before we respond. Now, taking a pause is not a bad thing, and I used to feel that way too. I used to think, oh my God, if I take a while to respond to something, they might think I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not in the conversation, or whatnot. But those are all negative and limiting beliefs. I want you to realize that taking a pause before we respond is such an important thing because, again, it gives our brain some time to respond, to think, and catch up so that we can have a more informed and a more meaningful and impactful response to someone. And lastly, I want to encourage you to practice your skills of speaking and communicating with others. Because the way we speak and communicate today is going to be so much better and so much different tomorrow, a month from now, a year from now, if we constantly improve and work to upskill that portion of communication. So as we end this video, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this. I hope you go out of your day, talk to your friends, your colleagues, your family, your best friends, and anybody else. And I hope that you practice these communication skills because I want you to be able to be a very, very, very masterful communicator. Thanks everyone. It's Barbie Jane, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.